just said she wanted. Okay. So we're finally into the text of Shoshinge, and today I'm going to go over some of the stuff that comes out in the larger sutra on Amida. And once again, this Shoshinge is considered probably the most important chant that we have in our Jodo Shinshu teachings. It is written by Shinran Shonin, and it really sums up the whole teaching of Jodo Shinshu in a very concise fashion. So let me just pull up the sharing screen. So I just sent this out to everybody, this that you see on the screen now. Okay. So I hope you can see it okay. And so to begin with, as I mentioned last week, the first two lines of the Shoshinge actually talk about this, what we call the profession of Shinran's faith in Amida Buddha. And you'll notice, so what I've done is I've got the Japanese and then I've got the English translation and then a little bit of commentary underneath it. The very first line, this Kimyo Muryo Junyo Rai, or I take refuge in Tathagata of infinite life. What's very interesting about Shinran Shonin, the founder of Jodo Shinshu, is that he was meticulous at making sure he used the right characters or the ones he wanted to use to get real meaning out of it. So the very first two characters here, Kimyo. In Japanese, Kimyo can be also, there's other words of explaining it. Kie is another way of, another different word. They both mean taking refuge, okay? But if you look at these characters themselves, Kimyo means, myo is life, okay? Myo is life, and ki is returning, okay? So, Kimyo Muryo Junyo Rai can be understood as returning life to the infinite life, okay? So Shinran purposefully used these characters. So it's not just taking refuge, but understanding that life itself returns back to the infinite life, that we are part of the infinite life. And so he specifically uses characters such as this to give that particular nuance to it, okay, that you may not have in if you use different characters for the same words. As has been mentioned before, this Shoshinge comes out in this Shinran's greatest work, the true teaching, practice, attainment of the Pure Land Way. And it said that he started writing this when he was around 53, when he was living in the Kanto area, Eastern Japan. And he worked on it for 20 years, till his mid-70s. So he would go over the draft and revise it over and over and over again. And so unlike today where we have other how should I say distractions, you know, they didn't have anything else other than the written letters or the words, and he couldn't just turn on the TV and watch a football game, let's say, right? So he had time to go over his notes over and over and over. And in fact, I'm just going to bring something up here. Let me just stop sharing for just a second here. So here's a version of, where am I going here? Oh, here's a version of the Shoshinge. Okay. This is a translation produced by the Ryukoku University. And what's interesting is in the beginning of it, was it not this one? Oh yeah, here it is. Okay. So here's an actual image of writings of Shinran Shonin. Okay. And there's a couple pages here. Here's his calligraphy. What's not really seen in here is that he does a lot of writing on the sides. And sometimes he'll write to explain the meaning of a particular character. So basically, he's telling the readers, the audience, how he wants it read. And by doing so, he's giving them specifically his interpretation or his understanding. Okay. So some of the characters, the way Shinran reads it is quite unique. It's not generally read in that fashion, but Shinran actually writes beside the character saying, this is how this should be read. And by doing so, it brings out a specific nuance, right? So going back to this first line that he wrote, these two characters, Kimyo, he used it specifically for this, so that not only does it mean taking refuge in the Tathagata of infinite life, but also that idea of life itself going back to the infinite life. Okay. So, and then the second line, so the first line is the infinite life. And the second line of this, Namo Fukashigi Ko, is talking about the inconceivable light. So, Fukashigi is inconceivable, okay? And Ko is light. A couple of Christmases ago, no, maybe it's a little bit more, maybe like 5 years ago, there was a toy that came out in North America here, and the toy was called Fushigi, and what it was just this little ball, and it seemed to float. And my daughter saw this and said she wanted that for Christmas. And of course, when I actually got it for her, it's just a little gimmicky thing. That basically is all it is. But what I was interested in was the name of this toy. They called it Fushigi, which is the same as this Fukashigi, and it's inconceivable. But I don't know how they came up with that name for that toy, but this is inconceivable as a word. And so what this means is that the light of the Buddha is beyond our comprehension. And this Namo, so this is what we call transliteration, the first two characters here, okay? The first line, this Kimyo, okay, this is a translation. So they've taken Japanese words to make the meaning, whereas this second one, Namo, is what we call transliteration, phonetic translation, where they've taken characters that sound like the original Sanskrit word. So the original Sanskrit word is Namos, right? And you're all familiar with when in India today, even the greeting of Namaste, it's got the same root, Namos, right? And so the second line, this transliteration is just these characters. These characters by themselves, if you were to read it, it would mean not south. The na is south, and mo or mu is not. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense just by itself, these characters. But when you understand that this comes from the word namos, that's what another way of saying taking refuge. Okay, and so entrusting myself, it was a translation that was written in the collected works of Shinran. So I entrust myself to the Buddha of inconceivable light. When you're saying namaste to somebody in a greeting, you're saying with respect. So basically, you're entrusting yourself to the other. And so Namo Amida Butsu, also these two characters in Namo Amida Butsu, is I'm entrusting myself to Amida Buddha, right? And in fact, very specifically in the Amida Sutra, Shakyamuni tells Shariputra exactly why the Buddha is called Amida. And this is the passage from the Amida Sutra. He says, for what reason, Shariputra, do you think that the Buddha is called Amida? Shariputra, the Buddha's light shines boundlessly and without hindrance over all the worlds of the 10 quarters. It is for this reason that he's called Amida, Amitabha. Again, Shariputra, the lives of the Buddha and the people of his land last for immeasurable, unlimited, and incalculable kalpas. It is for this reason that the Buddha is called Amida, Amitayus. Shariputra, 10 kalpas have passed since Amida Buddha attained enlightenment. Okay. And as I mentioned, how Shinran used Kimyo at the beginning. Okay. But very, very clearly it states here in this Amida Sutra why the Buddha was called Amida, because of these two aspects, light and life. And so these first two lines of the Shoshinge, Kimyo Muryo Junyorai, Namo Fukashi Ko, is Shinran's profession of faith, that he entrusts himself to this Buddha. And that's one of the common threads amongst all the what we call the 7 patriarchs that we'll be going through. So one thing that they have in common is that they all take refuge in this Buddha Amida. Okay. There are other things too that they add to it as well. So now going on with this Shoshinge. So today what I'm going to do is talk about the first part of this Shoshinge. We'll probably get up to the part, hopefully I'll get up to the part where it talks about Shakyamuni Buddha. But before he talks about Shakyamuni Buddha, Shinran actually talks about Amida and how Amida came about. So the next lines are read, Hozo Bosatsu in Niji. The Bodhisattva Dharmakara in his causal stage. So in Japanese, Dharmakara is Hozo Bosatsu. Bodhisattva is Bosatsu. Hozo is Dharmakara. And Hozo means the storehouse, the Dharma storehouse. Okay. So this is Bodhisattva by the name of Dharma storehouse. It's interesting. The Chinese characters are much more descriptive than the alphabet, right? If you just see Dharmakara, most of you have no idea what this is. But if you read Chinese and you read these characters, you know exactly what this means, right? Ho is Dharma and Zo is storehouse, right? So storehouse of Dharma. And so when he was in this causal state, well, what is this? So we have to go back to the story of Amida Buddha and how he came about. Now I'll come to that in just a second. But before he became Amida Buddha, he was in this causal stage as this bodhisattva named Dhammakara. And under the guidance of Lokeshvara Raja Buddha and Zaise Jizai Obusho, so this Lokeshvara Raja Buddha in Japanese is called Sejizai Obutsu. Sejizai Obutsu. Okay, is the name of the Lokeshvara Raja in Japanese. So he seeks out this Lokeshvara Raja Buddha in order to attain or to practice under him. And so the next line, it says, Token Sho Butsu Jodo-ing. So he looked at the origins of the Buddha's Pure Land. So he's talking about all the different Buddhas throughout the universe, looking at the origins of how each of these Buddha lands were formed. And so each Buddha land is formed by first a bodhisattva who makes vows, and once they fulfills their vows, then they create their own what we call Buddha land or Pure Lands. So when we talk about Pure Land, it's not just Amida's Pure Land. There are infinite number of different Pure Lands, different Buddhas. I don't know if, yeah, I guess infinite number beyond our conceptualization anyways. So he goes and searches out, or through the guidance of Lokeshvara Raja Buddha, he's shown all the different Pure Lands. And he sees the qualities of those lands and their beings within it, the qualities of each of those lands and their beings. And then after he's seen all that, he establishes a supreme incomparable vow. So he makes his own vows unique to him. And he makes what we call the great vow, the 18th vow, and which is all encompassing. And then he goes through 5 kalpas of profound thought, embraced, that should be, sorry. He embraced this vow, not embraced, I think it's embraced. And then after he's completed his vows, he then again repeats that his name should be heard in the 10 quarters. So up to this point here, the passages actually comes from the larger sutra. So I think it's imperative that we go back to that passage in the larger sutra to understand this. So Shinna is not just pulling something out of the thin air. He's actually quoting. He's saying, this is what it says in the larger sutra. And so when we go to the larger sutra, at the very beginning of the larger sutra, it talks about how Shakyamuni Buddha was giving a talk at a place called Vulture's Peak at Rajagriha. And it is there that one of his his cousin, his closest disciple, Ananda, notices something different about the Buddha. And so it's called the glorious features of the Buddha. And I've mentioned this before, Ananda comments, he says, today the world honored one dwells in the rare and marvelous Dharma. Today the world hero dwells in the Buddha's abode. Today the world eye concentrates on the performance of the leader's duty. Today the world valiant one dwells in the supreme Bodhi. Today the one most honored in heaven realizes the Tathagata's virtue. The Buddhas of the past, present, and future contemplate each other. How can this present Buddha not contemplate all other Buddhas? For what reason does his countenance look so majestic and brilliant? So Ananda comments on how brilliant, and we say that these are 5 majestic features of the Buddha that I just read here. And so then the Buddha asks Ananda, he says, did somebody prompt you to make this comment? And Ananda said, no, I just saw it myself. And that's when the Buddha says that, it's very good that you're in that frame of mind. You're at a special consciousness where you can understand my dharma, my teaching. And so then the Buddha begins to say, well, I have this appearance because I have to tell you this very rare and important teaching. And he calls it, it is difficult as seeing an Udambara flower, which blooms very rarely. Your question is of great benefit and will enlighten all heavenly and human beings. Ananda, you should realize that the Tathagata's perfectly enlightened wisdom is unfathomable, capable of leading innumerable beings to emancipation, and that his penetrating insight cannot be obstructed. So he's talking about, I'm about to tell you this very important teaching. And he then asks, he says, the reason for this is that the Tathagata's meditation wisdom are perfect and boundless, and that he has attained unrestricted power over all dharmas. Ananda, listen carefully. I shall now expound the dharma. And then Ananda says, yes, he will. So from this point on, then Shakyamuni begins to talk, or give the sacred story of Amida Buddha. And first of all, he says that there were 53 Buddhas in the past. And he says, the Buddha said to Ananda, in the distant past, innumerable, incalculable, inconceivable kalpas ago, a Tathagata named Dipankara appeared in the world. Having taught and freed innumerable beings and led them all along the path of enlightenment, he passed into nirvana. And then he goes on to say how there were 52 Buddhas that followed Dipankara Buddha, right? And then after the 53rd one, then this Lokeshvara Raja Buddha came into the world. And he says, Lokeshvara Raja Buddha and Dharmaka. So then appeared a Buddha named Lokeshvara Raja, the Tathagata, Arahat, perfectly enlightened one, possessed of wisdom and practice, perfected one, knower of the world, unsurpassed one, tamer of men, master of gods and men, Buddha and world honored one. So this Lokeshvara Raja Buddha came into the world, and these are all descriptions of him. And then at that time, it said there was a king, having heard the Buddha's exposition of the Dharma, rejoiced in his heart and awakened the aspiration for highest perfect enlightenment. So he renounced his kingdom and he goes to seek out Lokeshvara Raja. And he kneels before him, and then he walks around him 3 times, keeping him always on his right, prostrated himself on the ground, and putting his palms together in worship, praise the Buddha with these verses. So first he goes on to praise this Lokeshvara Raja Buddha. And this is the Sambutsige that we chant quite often during our Sunday services, right? And he starts off by saying, the shining face of the Buddha is glorious. Boundless is his magnificence. Radiant splendor such as his is beyond all comparison. The sun, the moon, and the Mani jewel, though shining with dazzling brightness, are completely dimmed and obscured as if they were a pile of ink sticks. The countenance of the Tathagata is beyond compare in the world. The great voice of the enlightened one resounds throughout the 10 regions. His morality, learning, endeavor, absorption and meditation, wisdom, and magnificent virtues have no equal. They are wonderful and unsurpassed. He meditates deeply and directly on the oceanic Dharma of all the Buddhas. He knows its depth and breadth and penetrates to its farthest end. Ignorance, greed, and anger, the world are forever absent in the world honored one. He is a lion, the most valiant of all men. His glorious virtue is unlimited. His meritorious achievements are vast. His wisdom is deep and sublime. His light, with awe-inspiring glory, shakes the universe of 1,000 million worlds. So up to here, he's praising Lokeshvara Raja Buddha. So next time you read the Sambutsuge, you'll know exactly where it comes from, how the context of it. This Bodhisattva Dharmakara begins by praising his teacher, saying, "What a great master! What a great Buddha he is!" And that nothing compares to this Buddha. And in this passage, he mentions a couple of things: his morality, learning, endeavor, absorption, meditation, wisdom, and magnificent virtues. These are part of the six paramitas, the six bodhisattva perfections. So he's saying they're unsurpassable in this Buddha. And then also he says that ignorance, greed, and anger. These are the three evils: ignorance, greed, and anger. And he says is not present in this Buddha. And so after he praises the Buddha, then he goes on to say, when I become a Buddha, this is the kind of Buddha I want to be. So I resolve to become a Buddha, equal in attainment to you, O Holy King of the Dharma, to save living beings from birth and death, and to lead them all to emancipation. My discipline in giving, mind control, moral virtues, forbearance and effort, and also in meditation wisdom. So this is the six paramitas, sorry. When it says mind control here, I don't think that's a really good translation. It's not controlling others' mind, it's controlling myself. Okay. So sometimes that could be misunderstood when I say mind control, that you're controlling other people's minds, but it's not. It's self. What's the word? Yeah. Well, self-control, basically. Yeah. So giving, mind control, moral virtues, forbearance and effort, and meditation and wisdom are these six paramitas. Okay. And it shall be supreme and unsurpassed. I vow that when I have become a Buddha, I shall carry out this promise everywhere, and to all fear-ridden beings shall I give great peace. So even though there are 100,000, there are Buddhas, 1,000 million kodis in number, and multitudes of great sages, countless as the sands of the Ganges, I shall make offerings to all those Buddhas. I shall seek the supreme way resolutely and tirelessly. So here, it's talking about paying respect to all the different Buddhas. And in fact, there's a passage in the larger sutra later on that describes beings. That's in the Amida Sutra. It's describing the beings in the Pure Land and saying that as part of their morning practice, the beings in the Pure Land go in the 10 directions to pay their respect to the other Buddhas and sages in the 10 directions. And they are allowed to do that and get back in time for breakfast. Maybe this is how Santa Claus gets around the world in one evening. There is actually, they call it in Japanese, Jinsu Riki. So it's the ability to, I guess, for lack of better words, transport oneself instantaneously to various places. So just like in the sci-fi movies like Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty, and they beam them up in a similar way. When one attains the oneness or is in the Pure Land, they have such an ability to instantaneously be at all places. And in fact, I think what this goes to show is that it's metaphorical. When we attain enlightenment, we become one with everything. So our thought process becomes one with everything. And that means that when our thought process becomes one with everything, you're able to be together with everything. Another passage in that Amida Sutra mentions that those beings in the Pure Land, when they feel hungry, just by thinking of the food, they get satiated. So they don't have to eat. They just by thinking of it, you get filled. And the reason for that is that they say it allows them to concentrate that much more on the Dharma. But again, here's the idea that you don't physically have to do it. You're just the thought of it, and you feel full. So it's this idea of being everywhere at once. Oh, there's a movie recently, Everywhere All the Time at Once or whatever, with Michelle. I can't remember her last name, but yeah. So basically, all these parallel universes, or you can be there at the same time. Okay. So even though the Buddha lands are as innumerable as the sands of the Ganges, and other regions and worlds are also without number, my light shall shine everywhere, pervading all those lands. Such being the result of my efforts, my glorious power shall be immeasurable. So again, here we're talking about how the light of the Buddha will be in all 10 quarters. So if he becomes a Buddha, there's no place that Amida's light does not shine. I have mentioned in a different lecture series about how one of the interesting depictions of Buddhism is when they show the paintings of what we call the 6 realms of suffering. You know, it starts off with hell, hungry ghosts, beasts, Ashura, fighting spirits, the human realm, and then the pseudo heavenly realm. These are called 6 realms of suffering, and I've shown you the Tibetan tanka on it. And what's interesting though is each of these realms of suffering, there is a Buddha that exists in each of these realms. So unlike other religions where they might say if you go to hell, it's for eternity, even in hell in Buddhism, there is a Buddha. So this idea of Amida's light shining throughout the 10 quarters is also expression of how it's universal. It's throughout. When I have become a Buddha, my land shall be most exquisite, and its people wonderful and unexcelled. The seed of enlightenment shall be supreme. My land, being like Nirvana itself, shall be beyond comparison. So there is a question that people have about when does one attain enlightenment? Does one go into the Pure Land, do some more practice in the Pure Land, and then become enlightened? Or does one become enlightened at the moment of entering the Pure Land? And depending on the interpretation, it varies. But according to Shinran Shonin, his idea was that the moment we enter the Pure Land, we become one with Amida, and hence we become enlightened as well. Okay, so the moment we enter the Pure Land, then our activities then changes, in which we start now working one with the Buddha. So we become compassionate, and we try to awaken those who are still in suffering. Okay, so in early Pure Land Buddhist ideology, it was believed that the Pure Land was still a place where you fulfilled your practices and then you became enlightened. And Shinran sort of took that one step further and said, because it is the working of Amida Buddha, the moment we enter, the moment we enter the Pure Land is when we have become enlightened. And that's why in this passage here, my land being like nirvana itself is stated by Amida through Shakyamuni, of course. I take pity on living beings and resolve to save them all. Those who come from the 10 quarters shall find joy and serenity of heart when they reach my land. They shall dwell in peace and happiness. I beg you, the Buddha, to become my witness and to vouch for the truth of my aspiration. Having now made my vows to you, I will strive to fulfill them. The world-honored ones in the 10 quarters have unimpeded wisdom. I call upon those honored ones to bear witness to my intention. Even though I must remain in a state of extreme pain, I will diligently practice enduring all hardships with tireless vigor. So basically, this Bodhisattva is saying, I will not stop until my wishes are fulfilled. So having said this, then Dharmakara, after he sung this song. Actually, sorry. Before I go further, I forgot to mention. So as you see, right before he sings this, it says here, he walked around him 3 times, keeping him always on his right. Okay, so when we do our meditations on Thursday nights, we have part of it is a walking meditation. It's ideal if we could walk around the Buddha, but in our Hondo, it's very difficult for us to do that. So we walk in clockwise direction. So if you keep the Buddha to your right, that means you're walking clockwise, right? If he's always on your right, think about it. Okay. So, and going around 3 times is very important in the Buddhist traditions. Amongst the various denominations, you'll see it very commonly practiced, where you're circumambulating the temple 3 times, and the 3 times are often referred to as the 3 treasures: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So going around 3 times. If you go to India, is very common practice. If you go to the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya, where it said the Buddha attained enlightenment, you'll see pilgrims by the hundreds, and they're all walking around the outer perimeter of the temple. Another famous one is a place called Sarnath. And there's a very large stupa there. And again, you'll see pilgrims walking around 3 times around the stupa. So this practice of walking around 3 times is very traditional. And you see this practice being done here by Dharmakara around Lokesvara Raja Buddha. So Dharmakara goes on after he sings this song. He expresses his resolution to become a Buddha, and so Dharmakara says to Lokesvara Raja, "Respectfully, world honored one, I announce that I have awakened aspiration for the highest perfect enlightenment. I beseech you to explain the Dharma to me fully, so that I can perform practices for the establishment of a pure Buddha land adorned with infinite excellent qualities. So please teach me how to attain enlightenment quickly and to remove the roots of afflictions of birth and death for all." So he beseeches Lokesvara Raja Buddha, but Lokesvara Raja doesn't, he's kind of cool in his reply to Dharmakara. And he replies to Dharmakara, he says, you yourself should know by what practice you can establish a glorious Buddha land. So he says, well, you should know what to do yourself. You don't need my direction. And at that, Dharmakara says, no, that's unfathomable. I have no idea where to even begin to create a Pure Land. And when he continues to ask for guidance, Lokeshvara Raja recognizes the true intent or the high aspiration that this Bodhisattva has. And so he gives an example, and he says, if, for example, one keeps on bailing water out of a great ocean with a pint measure, one will be able to reach the bottom after many kalpas and then obtain rare treasures. So, scooping out 1 pint at a time from the ocean, you can imagine how long it'll take to scoop out all the water of the ocean. But this is what Lokeshvara Raja says. If you're determined and you continue without giving up, eventually you'll reach the treasure. And he says, likewise, if one sincerely, diligently, and unceasingly seeks the way, one will be able to reach one's destination. What vow is there which cannot be fulfilled? So one of the things that we have to understand here in the Buddhist way of thinking is that we have a tendency to think everything has to be done in this life. But in fact, in Buddhism, they talk about the Buddha coming back many times over. So you might not reach your goal in this life, but this is only one in a continuum. So never give up. Even if you may not attain something in this life, keep at it. The path is what is important. And so that diligence, if you have that determination to think, I'm going to scoop out all the water in the ocean, even 1 pint at a time, right? That determination is truly the goal that will allow you to attain your final destination. So our way of thinking of just this life, from when I'm born to when I pass away, maybe, I just had the funeral service for Jack Harada, a very dear friend of mine who passed away at 103, and we think that's a very long life, but according to the Buddhist way of thinking, that's only one in a continuum. So if you have determination to attain enlightenment, that determination continues on from past earth to the next life and beyond. The Tibetans are very, very strong believers in this. And so you've probably seen stories of the when a lama passes away and they have to go and find the incarnation of that particular lama. And there was the story of the little Buddha with Keanu Reeves playing the part of the Buddha, and they find these 3 children that are all incarnations of one of the lamas who passes away. But again, that idea that the life continues on, or we continue on in some existence going forth, is very important in the idea of Buddhism. So after he mentions this, Lokeshvara Raja then decides, okay, your aspirations are earnest, and I will show you the various Buddha lands. So he takes them on a quest to see all the Buddha lands and the beings in those Buddha lands and how those Buddha lands came about. So remember back in the when we were when I was talking about the Shoshinge, that part where it says right here, sorry, right here, right? Bodhisattva Dharmakara in his causal state, under the guidance of Lokesvara Buddha, searched into the origins of the Buddha's pure lands and the qualities of the lands of the human beings and devas. Right? So that's what is happening right here, is that the Lokesvara Buddha is taking Dharmakara through to see all these different Buddha lands. And then, okay. So after he's shown all these, then the Buddha, then Dharmakara, then the bhiksu, having heard the Buddha's exposition of this glorious pure land, and also having seen all of them, resolved upon his supreme unsurpassed vows. His mind being serene and his aspirations free of attachment, he was unexcelled throughout the world. For 5 full kalpas, he contemplated the vows, and then chose the pure practices for the establishment of the Buddha land. Ananda asked the Buddha, how long was the lifespan of beings in the land of the Buddha Lokesvara? The Buddha replied, the length of the life of that Buddha was 42 kalpas. He continued, after that, Dharmakara Bodhisattva adopted the pure practices which had led to the establishment of the excellent lands of 210 kotis of Buddhas. When he had finished this task, he went to the Buddha, knelt down at his feet, walked around him 3 times, joined his palms in worship, and sat down. He then said to the Buddha, I have adopted the pure practices for establishment of a glorious Buddha land. The Buddha said to him, you should proclaim this. Know that now is the right time. Encourage and delight the entire assembly. Hearing this, other bodhisattvas will practice this dharma and so fulfill their innumerable great vows. The bhiksu replied, I beg you to grant me your attention. Now I will fully proclaim my vows. Okay. So after he was allowed to see all the Buddha lands and also the beings in those Buddha lands, that's when Dharmakara then contemplates for 5 kalpas. Remember, a kalpa, I gave a couple examples of measurement of time, infinitely long time. So the explanation is 40D, and I think that came out to about 16 kilometers, something like that. Anyways, if you had a room full of poppy seeds, and once in 3 years, either a heavenly being or a bird comes down and takes 1 poppy seed out, the number of years it takes to empty out that room is 1 kalpa, right? So 5 kalpas. Or the other one was, if you have a stone the similar size, I think 16 by 16 by 16, and a heavenly being comes by once every 3 years and gently brushes its sleeve over the top, and the friction causes a little bit of that rock to disappear, and the amount of years that it takes to completely rid that rock is 1 kalpa. So again, in an infinitely long amount of time, and he spends 5 kalpas contemplating on all the qualities of these different Buddha lands and how he can achieve the best of each pure land. And finally, upon that contemplation, he's come to a conclusion that these are going to be my 48 vows. And that's when Lokesvara encourages him, saying, you have to share that with others. And that's when the Buddha then goes on to proclaim those vows. And we did go through a little bit of this when we looked at the larger sutra, and I talked about the true vows and the 5 true vows, etc. But so that's what Shinna is saying here. He then established the supreme incomparable vow. So he talks about the 48 vows, but then he says he made the great vow rare and all-encompassing. This is specifically the 18th vow that he's referring to here. Okay. So in 5 kalpas of profound thought, he embraced this vow. Okay, not in grace, M grace. Yeah, it should have been embraced this vow. Then resolved again that the name be heard throughout the 10 quarters. So if you look at the first 2 characters here, Ju Se, Ju means to repeat. Okay, it can mean repeat, and vows. Okay, and in fact, this is a reference. So after he makes the 48 vows, at the end of it, by this time now, I guess he's become Amida Buddha. He restates his vows, and we actually chant this. We chant the Ju Seige. The verses reaffirming the vows. We chanted every Thursday night in English, and then we chant Jusege sometimes on Sunday services. But that's what he's referring to here in this passage in the Shoshinge. Shinran is saying that after he's completed the vows, then Amida reiterates certain vows. And the one in particular that he mentions is that his name will be heard throughout the 10 quarters. Okay, so I did bring up the Jusege today. I was going to stop here tonight, but that's basically the beginning, very beginning of the Shoshinge, and you see that this actually is alluding very clearly to the what we call our base scriptures, right? Shinran is recanting exactly what's happened in the larger sutra, and so that's what it comes out to here. And from this point, so next week I'll go into Shinran is saying that this is where this is the reason why Shakyamuni Buddha came into this world. After this, he actually goes on to talk about the 12 different lights of different names of Amida Buddha. And I mentioned that last time a little bit with what Ochi Sensei, when he gave that talk at Honko on the 12 light, the verses of the 12 light that was written by Donlan Tanluan. Right. So I will stop here for today. Maybe I'll go over this one more time. This 12 light, the song that Tanluan mentioned, and then we'll continue from there for next time. I ran on, perhaps. Are there any questions or comments? I will. Let me unmute myself, or I'm going to take the spotlight off. Okay. So, are there any questions or comments, or yes, Michael?
One of the things I just happened to notice when we were going through the Shoshinge there, that certain characters, like the character for Myo, seems to change about 3 times, whereas other characters like Ko and Dai seem to be consistently the same. Excuse me.
So what was that? Which character?
The character for Myo.
Myo?
Yeah. So if you look at the very first line.
They're just the same pronunciation, but they have different meanings.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay, so even if you might see Myo, there are many characters that could be read with that same pronunciation.
Okay, so the character would give you the distinct meaning in that particular case that it was being used for.
Yeah, it's a completely different meaning.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So again, when we recite like the Shoshinge, people don't realize how much this actually, is, as I said, it's not just something Shina gets out of thin air. He's actually quoting these sutras. And as I mentioned previously, that the traditional way of teaching in Buddhism is often where you first of all bring what we call the primary text, the sutras, the words of the Buddha, and then following that up to validate or to back up those words of the Buddha, then you bring in great masters. And that's what he does in this Shoshinge too. So this first half will be about the words of the Buddha, right? In this case, the larger sutra. And then he's going to talk about, Shakyamuni Buddha. And then he goes in the second half, he'll start talking about the 7 patriarchs and how they sort of reinforce what is said in these primary teachings. So that's how the Buddhist tradition works: is you have your primary teaching, and then so it's very much like a almost a university thesis, where you have your primary argument, and then you bring in all these points of view to back up your argument. So similarly, the Buddhist way of teaching, and it happens in all different schools, is they'll have here's the teaching, and then this teacher said this teacher said that, and so that's what we'll be doing.
So,
Hey.
So, did I understand correctly? So did you say that Lokeshvara Vararaja Buddha he showed Dhammakara Buddha to see all these 53 different Pure Lands, and then Dhammakara Bodhisattva made the best Pure Land?
Well, yeah. So basically, it's not 53. It's many, many more than that. There were 53 that came into our world, or our realm, if you will. But there are hundreds and thousands of billions of Buddha lands that he was shown, and he was also shown how those Buddha lands are created and what the qualities of the people and individuals in those Buddha lands were. And he looked at all the best qualities, or it's said that he decides to create a Pure Land that will have all the best qualities of all these Buddha lands. So yeah, it's obviously very much skewed from pure Amida Buddha Pure Land school in terms of understanding. Of course, Amida Buddha has all the best qualities, if you will. But if we look at it from strictly doctrinal, or if we look at Amida Buddha as what we call the Sambhogakaya, or the fulfilled Buddha, fulfilled Buddhas are an expression of what we call the Dharmakaya, or the Dharma body. The Dharma body has no form, no shape, but it has to express itself. So it expresses itself in infinitely different ways. And one of the ways that it expresses itself is Amida Buddha. So from that perspective, Amida Buddha is equal to all the other fulfilled Buddhas. The way of understanding this Pure Land, with Amida selecting all the best qualities, is definitely from a Pure Land Buddhist perspective. So it's out of respect. It's out of the fact that you want to understand Amida Buddha as the Buddha that you're. I mean, Amida Buddha is infinitely great, but so are all the other Buddhas as well. If they're Buddha, they all have to be awakened ones. So you can't have one Buddha on this level, another Buddha on this level, right? They're all basically infinitely wise and awakened, and just by the very nature of what Buddha is, the awakened or enlightened one. There are no different degrees, but from a Pure Land Buddhist perspective, out of respect, I guess the Amida Buddhas, when they talk of Dhammaka Bodhisattva, they make it the sacred story is that it's the best. He chose all the best aspects of all the different Pure Lands. But I think that's more how Buddhism developed along the way. So the very simple example is when the historical Buddha was alive, he consciously did not allow people to paint his image or create a statue of him, because he was well aware of people being attached to such images. And so when the Buddha was alive, historical Buddha was alive, to signify where the Buddha was or the teachings, they used things like footprints. So there's footprints of where the Buddha was, or Dhamma chakra. They have symbols, but not the image of the Buddha. Then what happens after the Buddha passes away? For a period of time, they start carvings, and initially those carvings are just to depict the life of the Buddha. So the Buddha was said to be quite tall in stature, so he might be a little bit bigger, but he's the same size as everybody else. And then as time goes on, you see the Buddha becoming huge and the other disciples becoming very small. And this is sort of what we call the deification of the Buddha. And it happens in all religions. It's not just Buddhism, right? So as you get into this deification or understanding of it's all done out of respect by the followers, right? And so similarly, when we talk about the sacred story of Amida, it's been through the ages, through the Pure Land followers and their great respect or great appreciation, that you start getting these embellishments, if you will, of he's taken the great aspects from all the Pure Lands and created the best Pure Land. And again, those are embellishments out of respect, if you will. That's why we call these sacred stories, and we don't necessarily need to be hung up on all the details of it. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Ted, did you want to say something? No? Okay. Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments, thank you very much for joining me tonight. And I will see you next week as we continue on.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Very much.
Thank you.